This is episode 205 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Ligia and Mike Deaton. And that's guests because you know I love when I have a couple or partners on. So this is going to be exciting. And they are the founders of Flipping Dirt. The Flipping Dirt coaching program is designed to help others grow their own real estate ventures, produce mounds of cash flow. Everybody likes that. And enable lifestyle transformation, which I think is important. That's their story. Mike and Ligia, welcome to the show.
Jonathan, thank you so much for having us on. We're excited to talk.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. I really do like having two people on the show, especially couples, because I think it's really important in real estate investing to both be on the same page, or there's no way you're going to be successful. Let's start with that. Were you both on the same page when you came to real estate as something, hey, we need to switch it up and do this?
I would say we were very much on the same page. We have our own podcast, the Cash Flow Fight Club podcast, and we love also having couples on because then we can bounce kind of this perspective back and forth. But my view on the whole spousal relationship in life and in business is, we came into this with a really strong personal connection and a really great way of just interacting with one another. Supportive, kind of on the same page, talking about things, looking at the future, setting shared goals. And so our story in particular was we were both out of a job at the same time. So, different life events happened such that we almost were forced to be on the same page, although things can go a different way. But we both had a little bit of a wanderlust and a desire to break out of the W-2 world. And so we took a moment in that moment to kind of reflect on what were our values, what did we want as a couple, and it was to spend more time together. It was to travel, to be able to be more flexible and free, and to spend this chapter of our life together. Yeah. And so for us, getting into a business that allowed us to do that was a priority, and we found land. I was listening to podcasts exactly like this, where we were exploring what are the different ways that we can get engaged. And I heard two different podcasts having two different guests that were talking about land flipping at the time. And they were talking about how they were just generating really unheard of on a percentage basis ROI, right? So you invest some money, you make 1,000% on your earnings, and that's within a few months or something. And so it really piqued my interest, and I went down that path a little more deeply and invested in some educational materials, and those came, but I didn't do anything with them because I was working full time, and it just sat on the desk, and maybe I glanced at it a time or two, and so I knew the power of land just from hearing other people do it. And then in that moment, when we, things kind of aligned, we have two daughters that were older at the time. We were empty nesting or close to it. And so my personal risk tolerance grew because I knew, okay, they're going to be off to college and kind of doing their own thing, and that's set aside. And Ligia is really supportive in a risk type environment, very much open to taking chances and risks. And so all of those factors really clicked into place for us at that moment. And we had this material. And so we just decided, we said, hey, let's give this a shot. It sounds kind of crazy, but we just set a 12-month time window and said, let's give this 12 months. We had some money in the bank, so we said, let's put some seed capital into this. We'll use this as our investment, and we ran with it. And the business model proved out, and we have seen it do so time and time again. It's really an impressive thing. But just as you mentioned, it's very approachable, and that's one of the top priorities for us. Was like, hey, we can get in this, we can invest money right away, and we can see immediate returns rather than having to invest in a bunch of overhead or put money up front or do, which we did. We invested in coaching ourselves. We went through some programs, joined some groups, and we invested in our education because we wanted to go faster. We wanted to do it without mistakes or with fewer mistakes, and just de-risk in that way. But it's a super approachable asset class, unlike a $50K or $100K multifamily investment or different thing, flipping a house where you have to put money down, or maybe you can find ways to not put money down, but generally there's some kind of outlay coming into it.
Yeah, I think it's really smart that you set aside X amount of money and also said, listen, we're going to do this for 12 months, because a lot of problems is people are thinking short term. They're like, well, if I'm not successful after a month, I just quit. But then if they had just gone for a month and a half, they would have crushed it. Like they had set up the momentum and then they just quit before the momentum. So that's really smart. And that's also working together to say, okay, we're both on the same page. We're going to know that's going to
Yeah.
cost this. I think that's just smart business planning, especially because you hadn't gone off as entrepreneurs. When you two were both growing up, were you thinking entrepreneur like? Or were you thinking like, we just got to knock out the business? Like, let's 9 to 5 this. When did it come in where you're like, hey, look, entrepreneurship sounds pretty awesome. It's risky, but let's go.
My dad was in real estate. He was, we were kind of the original home flippers, actually. When I
Mm,
grew up as a
okay.
boy,
Yeah.
we lived in Fort Worth, Texas, and my parents, as a side hustle, would buy old beat up homes. And I mean, they tell me stories. We lived in a beautiful home when I was about between the ages of 5 and 8 or 9. Really big, beautiful area of Fort Worth.
Yeah.
Big pecan trees. It was. I think they bought that house for $10,000 or $12,000. It was some crazy thing. I
Yeah.
drive by that house every once in a while when I go back home, and it's a mid 6 figure, pushing 7 figure type home now. But
Yeah.
we would just travel. I mean, my parents would buy a place, fix it up while we lived in it, and then we'd move on. I think my mom will tell me that I lived in 25 homes before I was 18 years old. I mean, we were just kind of all
Yeah.
over the place. And then my dad got into general contracting, building new homes when Arlington, Texas, in the middle of Dallas and Fort Worth, was really blossoming as a suburban type place. And so I grew up, and he also had his own businesses throughout that whole time. He was never a
Yeah.
9 to 5 guy. My mom was a teacher, on the other hand. She was the poor dad side of the equation for me. But entrepreneurship never even entered my mind. And I don't know if this was just my parents saying, go down this path, get a good job, or if it was just me. But I went to university and got a job. And now
Yeah.
in my 20s, maybe early 30s, I had a lot of ideas. But this was in this was in the 90s, 80s and 90s, I would say. The internet wasn't really a thing at that point.
Oh,
Entrepreneurship
I
was something.
remember, Mike. I'm on that age trend as well.
Yeah, something was
I remember
it was a
no
different
internet.
life. I mean, if you were going to be an entrepreneur, you were going to be a business owner, like a brick and
Right.
mortar or a service provider or something. And
Yeah.
so I had ideas, but for me, the risk profile was not there. Like I had 2 young kids,
Yeah.
a mortgage, 2 cars. I was on, the American path, if you will, in the American dream, but I was trapped and I had no thought of like, I'm looking at next month's bills and not really affording the opportunity to get out and get into the entrepreneurial space.
Yeah.
And it was a bit nail biting to even pivot out of corporate life into entrepreneurship. I mean, thankfully for us, we had money set aside and we had a runway of time and ability to be able to do that. And, but yeah, entrepreneurship was really never really an overwhelming thought in my mind until that moment. And now I could never dream of going back. Really,
Yeah.
I mean, I would make the world's worst employee. I think if I had to
Yeah.
get a job. Not,
Yeah.
if any potential employers are out there listening to the podcast, I would make a great employee.
For new people who get into your program, or for listeners who are like, wow, you know, flipping dirt sounds pretty good because it's low bar to entry. You don't need to have a ton of like real estate knowledge to start. What are a couple tips that you would give someone who wants to get into it, doesn't have a ton of money, but has enough to, get a couple properties in the bag? How should they start based on what you learned from the way that you started and how your students are starting now?
Well, first and foremost, I would say part of what we do on our initial client setup is exactly that. We look at kind of what resources do you have available, time, money, skill set. And there are markets where land is incredibly inexpensive. And so it's really, if you have a limited budget, it's just being a little patient. And so,
Yeah.
as with other real estate asset classes, land has all of the same subsets in terms of, I mean, like there's a wholesale market in the middle of buying and selling properties, right? And so you can, if you don't have the money or the time or want to go about finding your own properties, you can shop this wholesale market, and you can find properties where there is immediate profit to be had. Conversely, you can sell into the wholesale market. And so there are ways to kind of more quickly build up a little bit more capital such that you can do that.